Hello, we're going to do a little Reaper demo today. So thinking about how to paint blacks while also using other colors, but keeping them so they read as blacks when they're done. So the first thing we're gonna do is underpaint it in a color that I've pulled from your color palette. You had that sort of like muted brownish red, dried blood color. So I add a little bit of brown into this deep burgundy, and I'm just covering the whole area with that. I'm keeping it pretty flat, just buffed into different areas. You can see me mixing the brown and the red together there. I'm then going to take my brush and a little bit of medium, a little bit of damp, clean brush, add some medium to it and start carving out the actual shapes of the drapery that you're planning, so where we want those shadow lines to be. Cleaning my brush off, sorry, and also getting black. So just sort of making sure that the texture flows of the underpainting kind of follows where our shadow lines are going to be. We're going to start using straight black to paint in the areas we want to be the darkest. So I'm going to go ahead and paint the shadow of the hood that you have here. And that's just flat. I did switch to a smaller brush, so I have more control. And I'm going to put a little medium in it and start shading outside areas, so showing where that drapery is falling. We can lay it in nice and dark in the shadow, the underside of the drape, and we're going to work it up and kind of softly blend into the reds for our highlights. So you can see how we're just sort of getting the beginning of drapery showing through, the reds coming through at those higher points. I'm going to start softly bringing in the under the chin and jawline. Leave a little bit bigger of an area there for us to fill. I'm trying to follow sort of the lines you sketched in, though eventually I changed my mind and just paint it with drape that I would do because I can't see your sketch lines anymore. My apologies. So I'm laying it in pretty dark in these areas because we do want to go to pure black or very, very saturated, where for, over 45% of the painting, so that what we're seeing in the red really becomes just the highlight and the top of the midtones. But I do have gel medium in it, so it's not flat black. It's still going to see hints and be affected by that red that's underneath. You could also do it with water. It does not have to be gel medium. So you can see that it's still tinted a little bit red here. And I'm going to take my brush and carve out some highlights with just a clean brush, a little bit of gel medium, and you can see how we can pull the highlights and the drape back in. I started by painting around them, but it looked a little choppy, so I'd rather paint over them and then move them while they're wet. Laying a very nice dark shadow directly under the edge of that cowl and then starting to carry it down. I'm going to switch to a larger brush again. So I've got some water in this brush so I can create those swooping motions and it's not entirely opaque. I'm using the direction of the brush strokes to sculpt the swag of the piece. And this is when I just made the drapes all round and smooth. You can see how the red's showing through, but we're getting consistently darker. So I'm going to keep adding in at different areas, picking out my shadows, carving those in with this darker black, but allowing a solid amount of the red to show through in different ranges. So it's very red at the top of the highlights, but we're seeing it certainly get more muddy and darker as it heads into the shadows. Going back over the face portal because I want that to be flat black, like as dark as possible. In the outside edges, cleaning those up a little bit. And you can see I like the smaller brush for getting those little tiny, very perfectly dark saturated areas, and the larger brush for getting the blending in. Both of them are filbert, so they have a rounded edge. It'd be harder to do with a flat that had corners. you'd get little drag lines. So if you wanted just that amount of shadow, you could stop there if that was, close to what you were looking for. We're going to keep going and keep pushing this just to see different versions of it. But if you wanted it to have even more of a shine or be a little bit more graphic, we are going to add some highlights up to it, so widening the value range. So we've got pure black, and right now we're still very dark all over. So if you wanted to widen the value range, you could start by mixing a little tiny bit of white into the reddish brown that we were working with. Oh wait, wrong order. I'm going to add a little bit of blue to a few of our darkest shadows because that blue helps us sink that black to be even darker. It feels darker and more rich with a little blue, and even if the blue mixes with the red, it's going to create purple. So it's cooling it as it moves into our darkest shadow areas and also helping us build up that saturation and make it feel even darker than the red. So if there is any red showing through, it's going to shift to purple visually. Sorry for the siren. And just optically, that blue helps us make it feel like this whole thing is darker, right? So now we're going to add little tiny white dots for the eyes so that those can dry, and see how bright that white feels against the darkness of all of this. So this is where we're going to make a higher end of the mid-tone ranges, a little bit of our black, a little bit of our brown, and a little bit of our red all mixed into this, and then adding just a touch of white. And I can use this to start widening those midtones so we can have a little bit more of a gradation towards highlight. I'm using a little bit of gel medium, which as we know dries down darker than it looks because the gel medium looks white when it's wet, but it's going to help this just blend with the layers underneath it. And like I said, at any point you could stop. So if you just wanted this much highlight on it, you could stop there and just leave that nice bottom highlight edge, just showing that there's a cowl sitting on top of a base piece. But we're going to keep pushing it so you've got options. But I do think here it still has a really nice sense of being a dark piece of fabric. It's clearly supposed to be black, but it has some life and some color and some atmosphere to it. And you can tell it has shape, which is always important. Cleaning all my brushes off so we can do the next stage and picking out which one I want to use. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to pick up the rigger brush, which is a little tiny guy, so we can do a little bit of detailing. So I want the eyes to glow yellow, so now that that white's dried down a little bit, I mixed a little bit of yellow, a little bit of orange, and just dabbed it real thin on top of this with some water so that the eyes have a color, they're not just white. And now this is the rigger brush, so it's really, really long and dancey, but makes beautiful fine line if you put enough gel medium in there. We're going to use that to make sort of almost like a graphic line work version of our highlights. There's still a bit of gel medium in this. It certainly helps it move, and it's going to help it dry down a little flatter. If any of these looked too punchy to you, you could use a larger brush or a slightly damp brush and just sort of fade them in on one side or soften the edge. But that's where I'm going to leave it. I hope that helps.